Thank you, and hello, everybody. Very happy to be here with everybody. Good afternoon from the campus of The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. You saw a slide a little bit earlier with a land acknowledgement. I was going to read it, but I hope that you saw it as it is important. I am welcoming you to this Creative Pathfinders 2 event. My name is Susan Van Pelt-Petrie. And as our host said, I serve both as the chair of the dance department and today's host and moderator for this event. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Creative Pathfinders program and the Barnett Center. This is a series of virtual conversations that trace the careers and highlights the accomplishments of Ohio State arts alumni. This was initiated in 2020 by then Barnett Center Director, Professor Allison Corchetta. And the conversations that comprise Creative Pathfinders celebrate the accomplishments of arts graduates and strengthen relationships with our rich university alumni population, a worldwide community of 600,000 from the arts. The Creative Pathfinders 2 series is hosted by the Lawrence and Isabel Barnett Center for Integrated Arts and Enterprise in collaboration with a specific arts unit, in this case, our Department of Dance, and is supported by the Office of Advancement within the College of Arts and Sciences. The Lawrence and Isabel Barnett Center for Integrated Arts and Enterprise was created from a generous gift from the Barnett family. The center educates and prepares students for successful careers in the arts and related entrepreneurial fields while advancing and increasing student understanding of the arts, management, policy, and culture through entrepreneurial thought and action. There are vibrant partnerships with the Fisher College of Business, the Moritz College of Law, and of course, all the individual arts units within the college, and the Columbus arts community. Guests from local, regional, and national arts organizations provide leadership to students through the annual Barnett Symposium and Barnett Speaker and Seminar Series. The center contributes to the curricular offerings focusing on arts entrepreneurship and arts management, offering programs, working with students across disciplines, and housing the Barnett Fellows. I am very happy today to bring together two of our alumni and actually multiple relationships to the Department of Dance. First, I'd like to introduce Erin Carlisle Norton. She is currently and has for a while been the artistic director of The Moving Architects, the name of her organization. And she received her BFA from us in 2003, and then 10 years later, she came and did her MFA. We are also in conversation with our own Professor Emerita Bebe Miller, who is also the artistic director of the Bebe Miller Company. And Bebe is an alumni herself and received her MA here in 1975. So we're across the board representing several periods of the department's history, and of course the field of dance has grown and changed and morphed in all those years. So I look forward to hearing about their process of making dance and making art, making in today's world. Erin and Bebe. And did we loot? There we go. They'll come on in. And I will step aside. We're going to have about a half-hour conversation between Bebe and Erin, which will be fantastic. And then we will go into more interactive with our attendees. So you can submit through the Q&A, and I will help, and I'll come back and moderate that. There you go.
Okay. Erin, this is such a treat. I'm just really thrilled to be sitting here and talking with you, not only just about your life and dance, but because I knew you as an undergrad. It's just really thrilling just to see what you've done with your work, what you've done outside of your work as a choreographer and a director, and it kind of just, this is a great chance just to follow that path, if you could just kind of lay it out for us. But I'm most interested to start off with is why dance? What got you to OSU in the first place in dance? And yeah, so how did that all begin for you?
Yeah. Well, to say too, it's nice to see you because I have known you for over 20 years now. And just to say too, the first time I became familiar with your work, I have to say I was a freshman, and like I was at Virginia Commonwealth University at the time, and your company came, and it like changed my entire concept of what dance could be. So like you were a big part, like a huge influence. You didn't even know it. I was
I had
18
no
years
idea.
old.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
And
great.
that piece just like has stuck with me all these years. So just to say that, so it's nice to be here with you. But why dance? Like, I mean, that's like the big question, right? I mean, I think I was one of those kids who just something about it, you know, fell in love with it at like the age of 6. And it wasn't even always physically like that of dancing. It was what it looked like on stage, and how the dancers related and spatial relationships. I remember even being, you know, 7 or 8 years old, you know, seeing ballet or, you know, seeing the big kids dance and just watching them filled me up so much. And then there was just something, you know, I've always done it. I've always wanted to do it my whole life. It wasn't ever a choice, you know, and I, you know, I've had my ups and downs, like, you know, my whole career in terms of my relationship to it. And there was a time, you know, when I was in college where I wasn't sure if that was the path for me. And then I kind of found it again. And yes, as I've been in the field year after year, like the physical exploration has kept me, you know, very interested alongside the choreographic processes. But I see them as 2 separate things, like the physical practice and then making dances to me are very separate, actually. And I've been interested in both of them. Yeah, my whole life.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And as you're gesturing, it makes me think of, I just looked at a couple of your works online. And what struck me was like how clear visually where you place people, how that happens. So I love hearing that what got you into it was just like watching the space unfold as, you know, as a youngster. And I'm curious, did you find your way into visual arts as well when you were young, before you came into the BFA program?
Not so much. I didn't really, not when it came to dance. You know, I think I was as a person drawn to like architecture a lot. But for some reason I never, you know, took classes in it. I was so all consumed by dance. Like I couldn't imagine trying anything else. Like that's just the kind of kid I was, even in high school. And not until I would say I was a grown-up, you know, but not until I found collaborators to work with that I like let myself kind of go there, you know. I mean, now
collaborators as dancers and or as visual artists as well, or
yeah, I mean, I would say both. And I would say currently, I've been working with a woman, Gwen Charles, since 2017, and she's a visual artist. And she, you know, she brings, I use a lot of props and like movable objects and like fabric and this big inflatable bubble we've used a lot. So she kind of brings me things and is like, let's try this. And it's like, yes, like she helps me like connect the movement with these objects in a way that feels very satisfying and very natural. I just don't think that way because I think with the body, I don't think of stuff necessarily unless a theme makes it happen, you know, for me suddenly, you know, in this, a piece a few years ago, like about the hardship of women I made in like the Depression era. I was very clear about this theme. Yeah. And suddenly this rope, like I was like, we need a big thick rope, you know, and then we used a big thick rope, you know, so like it kind of came later, but it didn't start with that. But definitely the collaborative aspect of it, like it expands my mind more, you know how it is working with collaborators. You're like, yes, that like adds to it, it's into it.
Sure.
It's nothing
and
like
I'm just imagining you in the studio and that moment of like, we need a big thick rope. And you know, it's like, well, why? Aren't you dancers? And shouldn't that be enough? But somehow there's that translation into another texture, another way of time, you know, something that just stays where you put it. I mean, a piece of rope doesn't move unless you move it. So
and space, like how it moves people in space would always interest me a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were a BFA, you graduated in 2003, and then I think you went to Chicago. I was reading on your bio, and you spent some time there. And is that where the Moving Architects, your company, started? Can you give us a little sense of how that happened?
Yeah. So after graduating, I did not feel drawn to New York. It seemed way too intimidating. Even though everybody else went there, I didn't. And so I went, for some reason, I decided Chicago was the place. And so I went there, and at the time I was engaged to my now husband. And so we went together, and it was a great community for me. I think it was the right place for me to start because I felt I could find my place there. There was opportunities for me. I found a great group of dancers to work with. Eventually I did start my dance company there, and I had a lot of support, a lot of help, a lot of interest. I got off the ground pretty quickly. And I think I had the right people at the right time working together. And then during the time too, when I was in Chicago, I got certified in Pilates. I also got my certificate in movement analysis, all the Laban work. And so I kept studying at the same time as starting the company. So like a lot of very rich, active years. I have a son now who's 8, but I did not have a child. So I was just always like making and doing and going, and I'll say working, for lack of a better word, but
well,
it was
making and doing
place.
is working. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a good place to start. And then, I decided, what's my job? What's my day job? What am I going to do? Like teaching Pilates was not fulfilling me enough. And I also felt like I wanted to go back to school, just that feeling like I just wanted to, And so after looking at like a lot of programs, I did not intentionally want to go back to Ohio State, but it had everything I wanted more of. Like I wanted some technology, especially I wanted to be able to video edit, and I didn't know how to. I mean, we're talking a while back. It wasn't on your phone, right? Like you couldn't easily edit things without like taking courses,
Right. And with machines and things like that. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So anyway, I found myself, we found ourselves, at Ohio State again, and a very different experience in undergrad, different people, different focus, different everything.
There is that difference. I mean, it's a whole, when you're in undergrad, it's like, wow, I get to dance with people. And then it calms down, and it's like, you realize you're going to have to live with this kind of, this is your, the ballooning of a career, of a way of just thinking about the world, not only just making dances. It's sort of like so what do I need? What do I need to approach making with? What am I thinking about? So no, I get it.
Just wanted more.
Yeah. So you're back at Ohio State, and did the work change? What do you think?
I think I've thought about this. I think what Ohio State as a grad student gave to me was the knowledge I've taken away from it are things I learned in new areas like technology. I took a lot of arts administration courses. I learned Gaga technique, and like these things that were new. But when I think about the dances I made, they are not my favorite that I made there. Anything I made during that time, I kind of left behind, because I think what I actually did, I questioned like how I learned to make dances. I questioned everything about my process, realizing like that I already kind of knew what I was doing. And for some reason, I thought when I went to grad school, I had to throw that all away and then find a new way of making things. And nobody told me that. It was just a feeling I had. Like I didn't trust myself that I already had, a good 10 years of making behind me. And I just thought I had to start again. And so I didn't care for any of the work during that time. So I was making work on my company, and I made some on students. I guess I'm also thinking of my final grad project, like was not me. I don't know how else to say it. It just wasn't.
It's a final grad project. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it was like all this stuff. And I remember watching and being like, what is this? But I guess I had to kind of go through that to like know say no to all the things I'm not and say yes to the things I am and interested in. Upon reflection.
Well, and also, I mean, I think the sense of a grad project, it's like some kind of culminating capstone experience, but it really is just one more step along a really long line. We hope a very long line of making. So it totally makes sense to me that the things that you're learning are, incorporated for later years, as opposed to like, oh, it's going to show up in the next piece, in the next piece. But there's a whole range of things that it seems like, not only in terms of choreographic or directorial work, but in how to think about dance in the world. And which leads me to your podcasts, which I am fascinated by. For those who are listening, you should check out the movingarchitects.org. There's a whole list of podcasts that Erin has done with dancers and makers. Is it called dancers? What's it called?
Movers and shapers.
Movers and shapers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dance.
Catchy. Right?
Yeah. Very nice. I like it. But there's a range of work, and it seems what's interesting to me is like, I don't look at it in terms of aesthetics or style, but it's just people talking about their entry into the field, what they're doing, how they're thinking about it. And that you, as the one who's organizing all of that, you must just get a whole ton of information and ways of wondering how people are organizing their lives around this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So just to say like how the podcast even started, I started it, it's been a long time. It was 2015, which feels like a long time anyway.
It isn't, but yeah.
Yeah. In terms of podcast land, that's a long one. And I was into podcasts even when they first started, back when you had to like download it to iTunes and then download it to your iPod. Like it was a big, long process. I was really into it. And there was one podcast, there was a dance podcast I listened to when I lived in Chicago. Ava Asantua made it, if you know her.
Yeah.
And she just interviewed choreographers, and I loved it because I felt like I had an inside look into their life. I was in Chicago, they were in New York. I felt more connected. Chicago sometimes felt a little isolated living there. And so it felt like I could connect, and I was really into it. And then she stopped doing it. And there wasn't at the time a dance podcast. So I moved, so I'm in New Jersey, just outside of New York City. I'm in Montclair. And so when I moved here after grad school, I was completely new, but I was not new to the dance field. So I was in a very odd position coming here. I didn't like know people so much, but I'd been doing it for a while. So I was trying to find my way in the dance field. And this idea of a dance podcast it was like in the back of my mind. I was like, nobody's doing it. I guess
nobody was doing it. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. And I didn't, this like the one class I didn't take in grad school was like audio editing or like oral history. Like I didn't take those classes, of course. And so I did research, I got some help, and I started it. And for me, it was an entry into New York City. Like I could feel like I was there and talking with people. I used to do them all in person. And it's continued on because I like hearing people's stories. I've always been drawn to interview podcasts, especially. I think podcasts are awesome. You can listen to them anywhere you go. They've only grown in years. And to me, it was anybody who was shaping the dance field. So maybe very famous people, maybe not, maybe people who just made a big impact where they lived. And then over the years, it's become more, I write grants and all these things. So I've had to like really define what the podcast is. And it is an advocacy tool. It does legitimize all of us in the dance field because so many people are in the field. They don't get acknowledged. It's just not like you're not being interviewed on like the David Letterman or whatever, late night shows. Like there's not a place in society for to give these people space to talk. Right. So I wanted to do that. And so it evolved over the years to just be a platform for me to just like listen and have people talk and tell their story. And that's what it is. And, since COVID, they're now all virtual, which I don't like as much, but it's, the way of the world. But I have been able to interview people not in New York, which is really great.
Which is great.
And, like you said, hearing people's story, like very intimate stories and their processes, it does two things. Sometimes I'm just super inspired, right? Like, wow, they've had their company for 40 years. They've gone through the ups and the downs. Like I can keep going, right? So there's some days that are like that. Other days I listen to them and it almost bums me out because it just, it feels so hard. And so it's not an easy life sometimes in dance, right? You're chasing grants. the ups and downs of engagements you're in, you lose dancers, and just the pattern, and some days I'll really feel it after talking to somebody. It's more often the positive after talking with people though, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I'd also imagine depends on what kind of day you had in the studio on your own. I mean,
Right.
that might, kind of color how you're looking at it all.
Yeah.
But there was an earlier iteration of this, like kind of before podcasts, and I'm sure you've heard of Eye on Dance.
Yeah.
From I guess it was the 1980s or so. Celia Epiotis, who was also a graduate of Ohio State, and did I forget, it was a New York City, one of those off TV channels. It was way before the internet and before streaming, but you could see these interviews that she had with dancers and a whole variety. So I like what you're saying about this advocacy of the field, and that we're so used to having people talk about the works themselves, the dances, as being the inspiring part, but it really is a life of making with people in a room with you. They're telling jokes, and you'd have a coffee break and you see like what's new and you catch up, and then somehow those days go on and you have a product. But it's the connection between the products that I think is really fascinating, about like what brings you from one to the next, like that piece of rope or that bubble, inflatable piece of plastic that you're inside of. But,
that is one major through line, I would say, about the podcast, is that to have a life in dance is not about I get to be on the stage and have another show. That's not actually the fun part. That's like not the part I like the most in any way. It's the people you work with. It's making things together in the studio. And you'll hear when people get into their groove, it's when they find the right collaborators, when the dancers click with them. And that's the through line, is the people, and that's why, you keep going. I mean, that's why I keep going. It's not me by myself in a studio. Like that's not so interesting all the time,
And I'm curious, like as you've continued, your company is 15 years old pretty much, and that the pace of working, I'm sure, goes up and down. The tone of working, how are there big pieces? Are there evening length? Are they smaller? But how does the process of making change the dances that you're making? What is how long does it take? What are your notes like?
Yeah.
What is that like?
Well, my notebook's a mess of scrawling. I know that.
They always are. That's great.
I went through a lot of your notebooks when I.
Oh yes, you did.
Yeah. I did.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it changes a lot. My age, when I moved to to the New York area, I had my son right away, and my time was so different and priorities kind of shift in terms of what you want to give more time to. And so, especially when I had a little baby, like I wasn't going to be in the studio all the time. I was nursing, like all those early year factors, and money, it's very expensive. I still have to work. I still have a family and all these things. And so what kind of happened without me meaning to, is that it was much more collaborative with the dancers making movement material. Before then, it was generally all of mine, and then we would manipulate it. But definitely it was like my fingerprints were very, like the DNA of it was totally me. And then it started to switch where it was a lot more of the dancers and their movement preferences were into it. And I think now it's somewhere in between the two. I think, because I'm very interested in certain physicality now that I want to come back to. So for a while there, I feel like the movement aesthetic kind of changed away from like what I love about like my movement aesthetic, I'll say, and it kind of became more of like a group dynamic. And now I want to pull it back in a little bit, but also I'm getting older. So like I'm in the studio working on material, and like I can't do it 10 times in a row. Like I'm not that like ancient, but like it's not like I can still walk, I'm fine, everything's fine, but like that left side of the sacrum, I can't,
yeah.
And I'll watch a video of myself and everything gets like more and more minimal. It's almost like gestural, but like I know what it is, so I can teach it to the dancers and be like bigger, faster, whatever, right? But that's a big shift. I don't like that shift so much. I'm not liking this like little change that's happened in the last 2 years. You know, I'm in my 40s, like it's going to happen, you know?
Yeah, it's going to happen. And then you're going to be in your 50s and so on and so forth. So just take it from me that one of the joys, though, it seems like you're talking about like how, oh, what is this other tone that I have? You get to put the language to it. You get to describe it, particularly if you're, you know, as an LMA, Laban movement analyst, analyst rather. It's like you have all of this knowledge of description and time and all the intricacies that make it. And, you know, and then mixed with somebody who can do not only the big stuff, but the little stuff. I mean, just the nuance, availability, it seems like maybe that's something that is there that you can look forward to.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I love dance and I love doing it. And I love like what happens to it and what happens to us in the field is really what we're tracking. You know, yes, we have the pieces and yes, we have a connected practice, but we also are leaving, and this is the dance advocacy speaking, we're leaving an imprint of how thinking bodies progress and what becomes of interest and how do we survive this. And I'm curious, you know, with your work in Pilates as well, but there's a whole embodied practice that we carry and that I think that other people are slowly kind of glomming onto, that what we know about how to walk down the street and how to be safe and how to be healthy and be creative. And I mean, it's a good field. It's a yeah, yay, dance. And then you get a dance out of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a wonderful personal thing. So
like a good moment to pause.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah. Thank you. I've been taking notes. We'd like to open to any of our participants to have any comments or questions. And I've got some thoughts about your life and work and how place affects the work, how people affect your work. I'm wondering whether you could say, maybe both of you could address this a little bit about notions of legacy or the archive. You know, Bebe, I know you've been working a lot, just like, what is that? But have you thought about what's left? What do we leave behind, if anything?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll take that on because I'm maybe just further advanced toward the legacy end of things, and still going on. We were, as right before the podcast started, the webinar started, we were talking about I'm back at Ohio State and I'm making a piece. I made a piece and it's going to be performed in April and was great. And realizing that part of the legacy is there are these pieces, but I feel that we get to leave a seed of a way of being in the room together. That these young dancers came, they didn't know me, and they hadn't seen my class because I hadn't been teaching for years and years. So it seemed like my job was to get us all into the same room so that the thing between us was this creative element and see what would become of it. So it's really about building a kind of community that I hope that's what they take forward in their own lives as dancers, rather than the piece themselves or the cool moves, but that if they can track the change that happened, and especially, you know, they're wearing masks, we can't see expressions, I can't tell if they're laughing at my jokes, but that there's a way of being that ultimately is the foundation for creating anything. And so maybe that's the legacy. Maybe it's just a particular tone of process and practice that we get to pass onward. Yeah.
I mean, there's something interesting and also like reviewing your body of work. Just to me, like looking back and being kind of surprised by choices or watching a piece and being, oh, that was, you know, both ways, like that was more interesting than I thought, or, ooh, I should have really done something. I watched a piece that was probably maybe 6 years old the other day because I had a memory of it and I wanted to watch it. And I was like, that music, why? Like, why? I needed, like, I was very critical of it, but something at the time I didn't notice. So not just choreographically, but like where you were in your life and the themes you chose. There's something really interesting in that. It's like a timeline. It's not like looking at a photo album though, but it's like your own personal, inside timeline. I'm sure you both know what I mean. Like
Yes.
you know why that piece happened or who was in the room and the dynamics that went into it. And I can still pinpoint like, oh, like I remember and know that person, like just from watching them, like they come back to me, like the relationship and who they were. And it's like, yeah, it's so vivid, you know? Yeah.
And there's one other thing it makes me think of, that we're also, in looking back at a piece from 6 years ago or 16 years ago or 26 years ago, that you see what you didn't have the skill for at the time to solve. I remember there's a choreographer, Phyllis Lamhut, who's a real mentor of mine, sharing with me the idea that, you know, she looks at a piece of work and she did not know how to solve the problem that she created. And I was just blown away by hearing her admit that. And it's something I've just carried with me, that we don't always know, and that's part of our legacy. Sure.
That's so true. Erin, I'm wondering whether in the recent development, well, the last numbers of years now of Black Lives Matter and social justice movements, has that affected your work in some tangential ways, some core ways?
Yeah. I think the history of my company has largely been white women in the room because that's who shows up at the auditions. And to me, it was just that simple. Like whoever shows up, you pick the ones who you feel like you can work with, who have your aesthetic. And that's who it's largely been for us. And I think with all these changes that have happened, to me, I've come to understand that like who shows up in the room and isn't just random. Like that's a whole system in place of who shows up and why those people are in that room. And so I've wanted to expand the company to be, you know, more diverse, not because it's trendy or whatever, because I feel like, of course, like that's happening. But I want like those voices and I want those backgrounds and I want those people together and I want to see what we can make together. To have people who aren't exactly like me in the room, you know, and I think that's what it's been. It's been a lot of people who have very similar backgrounds, very similar views of the world all together. And I think there's something more to it. And I'm seeing that in the last few years, I've had more different types of people together in a room, and it's more, just different conversations and different things happen, you know? And so, you know, my company, it has been all female, all women. And that's been important to me. It's just something, I'm really interested in the female form, female strength, female in relationships. And I've had a little pushback about that. Like, why does it have to be a gender? Everything around gender that's happening, and just questions about that. I had a recent audition and that came up, you know? And so I'm still trying to, you know, find the language around that and be more clear about that. It's just like changing times and the generations are different. Like the dancers I have now, they're in their 20s, you know, I'm like, one of their moms is like 5 years older than me, you know? So like there's these different generations too, that see things differently too. And so they put that, they challenge me in those ways too. I'll just give a little example that piece I did recently, Coup. The first time the piece was performed, it was 3 white women and an Asian woman in the piece. And at the end, everybody attacked the Asian woman. But when the piece was made, that was not in purpose in any way. It was because her role at the time had the most jumping and leaping and everything. And she's like, sure, I love to jump. I love to, like, I want to be the, you know, she volunteered for this one role. And then it kind of ended up where everybody kind of ganged up on the most powerful person in the beginning. Powerful person in the beginning gets taken down at the end. And then when it was made a few years ago, and then we reset it in 2020 for a staged video recording. And we were actually on Zoom, rehearsing on Zoom, whatever. We were on Zoom, and suddenly it was like, what are we doing? You know, like this does not feel good, you know? And that was a moment, where it just like, whoa, like that. So that has happened a lot. So there's been, these shifts, and I welcome them, and I think the whole field is shifting when it comes to gender, when it comes to who's in the room, everything, especially in New York, it's who's the opportunities, they're trying to, give opportunities more to everybody, make it more equitable. So yes.
We're certainly really I will say my eyes have been opened a numbers of times in the last 5-6 years of just really doing some work, and you can't ignore representation and issues of who's in the room. You just can't. And so it's rich. I mean, it has really opened up some interesting conversations and curriculum and spaces. And Bebe, do you have any thoughts?
Oh yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And I think that for me as a Black artist, as a Black female artist, for all of my life, that who is in the room with me has always been under a certain kind of scrutiny. And often depending on the decade, and depending on, is it not enough Black people? Is it too many Black people? Is it what's the equality? So that there is some kind of a very changeable, perfect mix that people keep on assuming. And I think that this is all what's most powerful for me is the opportunity that's happening where different kinds of rubs are in the room and are visible in the processes, that are visible in the piece themselves, and they don't solve the problem. There's no solving of the problem, but there is an effort toward justice. There's an effort toward listening. There's an effort toward a range of things that we may not get there. And I don't know. I mean, I feel that it's always been there, and just different people are now talking about it in a very different way. So, and I'm glad for that, for opening up the conversation. But the conversation has always been there, and it depends on what side what you're able to hear of this particular conversation. So, I'm glad that it's more audible and visible for many people, and which is not visible for all. So.
No. Again, to our attendees, feel free to use the Q&A for any questions, comments, arguments, all the above.
Arguments would be great. Yeah.
Artists will take that and work with it. I was wondering whether you could each talk about, and Erin, maybe this is a little bit more on the pragmatic side, I guess, or the ecosystem of getting dance work done, right? The funding opportunities, the cycles, the world of presenters, so we could talk about them and that. And is it changed? Is it functioning? Is it not functioning? I have often been greatly concerned about the ecosystem, which works for a few, but not for many. And anyway, can we just go into that world?
I'll start. I think it's interesting because I think Bebe and I are in different kind of generations of funding, and presenters. I mean, in my experience, you can't expect to run the company off of performances in any way, right? So there has to be other, in my experience, like other streams of income. So there are grants, but also, I have movement classes, I have a movement outreach program, teaching commissions, master classes, all these other ways to support the company. I think it's a different world pre-COVID and post-COVID in my experience so far. I think, and also so many places, I mean, I'm, in the New York area, like don't exist anymore that used to, be venues too. And so when I was in Chicago, I did a lot of self-producing because that's the ecosystem that's in Chicago, a little bit of co-presenting. Here, it's a lot of co-presenting, I don't have to, show up with everything in a space, but it's not like good money. It's not like a lot to go on, but it, it does help. So I think there's less venues. And I also think there is like a hierarchy in some sense of the names that get presented a lot over and over again and get increased funding over and over again. There's like circuits for like those kinds of companies. And then there's like, maybe I'm in this other tier that's like, we're around and like, where do we fit in? And like, we keep going, and it's challenging, and what I've started to do more of though is, different partnerships. I've been going even more in that route. I've been working with more visual artists, and like before COVID, like I was doing this big project with like a curator and a couple of visual artists, and as a different kind of package to kind of take around. And that was getting some, it was getting some momentum, and then everything shut down classically. But yes, I still write grants. Residencies, rehearsal residencies, space residencies are probably the most opportunity there. And that those mean a lot too. It's very hard pre and post COVID. So it's like a post COVID world. So I don't know where we are now. Like I have a show in 2 weeks that's presented. It's not like, there's the venue, the lights, here everything is, you get a cut of the box office sort of thing, but that's kind of how it works. I feel like now, so
Where's your
that's my
show?
long-winded answer. Yeah.
Where's your piece going to be performed?
At Green Space, we're in a split bill show. So Green Space is a like a loft theater space in Queens, and they're one of the only people who have come back this year. So nothing has really come back for shows. Yeah, it's tricky.
I'm kind of fascinated by this because nothing's come back. Well, things haven't come back all across the board.
Mm-hmm.
So don't feel that you're alone.
Oh no. But when you're planning ahead and you're like, but there's nothing, like there's nothing.
Well, our whole way of planning and just even what we expect has shifted. You and I are in different generations, and my generation is also on, kind of on moving off into another direction and not performing as much and so on. And having been one of those companies where we were able to support ourselves, not only me as the director, but the dancers by just doing our company. I mean, those days are long gone. That was like 25 years ago. And so the shift has not been an even shift, but it definitely has been a shift of resources and interest, I think. But I'm really taken though by and this is maybe a pre-COVID thought, but just the kind of entrepreneurial thinking that you have to do that is completely new to the field. You'll find a series at your neighborhood bar at 11 o'clock at night every Thursday for 2 months and perform something. Those kinds of things where dance shows up in a very different kind of place, which didn't seem possible before. And that would not necessarily be a grant, you get a grant to do that, but maybe it is a cut of the box, a cut of the jar on the table, but that might be lucrative enough for in a certain situation. But the way of thinking about dance in our lives has really shifted. And so how do we think about this even as teachers? Are we wanting our students to be like, professional dancers or great audience members? What do we know about the art form, and how does that show up, and how does that support the ecosystem? I don't know. It's a tricky time. But the Kickstarter generation, the GoFundMe as another way of seeing dance is working for many people, on a certain level. So we're sharing the burden in a different way, which maybe means we're sharing ownership and connection in a different way too. So
there is a shift too. I've noticed, like 15 years of the company, right? So when the dancers, when I started, they were looking for companies to stick around with, right? The company model was still kind of intact. In those early years, I couldn't pay them very much, but they were in a company, like, we were in it together. And then gradually it's become more, especially living where I live, project-based, right? So they only want to commit to a few months because they know, choreographers know, I can pay you this much for 3 months for this show. And so they're hopping around, and the company idea is nice, but doesn't feel practical or feel like it makes sense in their life too, to try to make a living, right? So even like what dancers are looking for has changed, and what they expect from the field has changed. You know.
And for me, a slightly different thing happened. I feel like really fortunate and blessed to be working with the two main collaborators I've worked with over 20 years, like Angie Hauser and Daryl Jones. Daryl from 1995, 1996. So, and we've continued, and they are now both professors in their own institutions. They have their own rehearsal and performance schedules, as well as everything else that they do. They have their own families, so that there is this other form of peerage, you know, being together as peers, not so much the dancers. They don't belong to me. They're not my dancers. They are dance artists on their own right, but we happen to share a real love of working together. And we're finding ways of continuing that. So that shows up in the field in a very different way. And I think also that funders are they're in the position to fund art. They're not going to stop funding art. It's just the art maybe is, you know, recognizing how much of an attraction we are for funders in very different ways. So that will always be there. Who those funders are keeps on changing, and who they fund obviously keeps on changing. But there is a conversation that is ongoing, I feel.
Erin, you said something that as dance artists, we kind of know, we know that just doing shows is not going to support a company. But that can be a surprise to non-dance people or non-arts people. And then you rattled off a list of things that you do to help keep the revenue stream. Can you just go into that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, so I think to remember how much money and resources go into even making a piece, I think people are surprised by like how much rehearsal space costs, travel expenses, paying the dancers for rehearsals. Like I don't pay myself, you know, that'd be nice, but like there's so much goes into just having a show. So even if it does make money, you're like breaking even, you know, so there's nothing there. Yeah, so donations, right, grant writing, those are like the common, you know, everybody wants those good funders, and like, you know, I have a board, you know, and that sort of thing with the company. It's a nonprofit. But what's been for me, the podcast has generated some money as well. And also I have a movement outreach program actually that, you know, I partner with a local church, and it's actually a pay what you can program. And they've been very generous with me. And so I've been able, pre-COVID, especially, I had kids classes and I had Pilates that I taught as well. And that, you know, that's been really great. And I'm actually going to start like a teen program in this next year. I'm interested in working with teenagers now. I'm kind of done with the 3-year-olds and I'm into the teenagers. So that's been really good. And I think it's like it's finding partnerships also and commissions, right? So like those are also, or like I'm teaching for 5 days at this school, you know, like those are like very nice things. Again, I keep dividing it like pre and post COVID because it's been 2 years now, everything, you know, shut down. And it's nice. Like I've gotten a few fellowships here and there that like, you know, bring a lot of money in. Those are good. It's a hustle, you know, put it mildly.
So the calendar changes, it seems, like how often you perform, where that happens.
Yeah.
And the balance between teaching and rehearsing keeps on changing. And so there's something about that shift that feels like we really are, if we take, you know, the long run, that we are talking about a dynamic that is going to be ongoing in a certain way. So do you feel, I was thinking of, I on your website, you have or maybe you just sent me this link of the solo work that you're doing, and you talked about dance film, which is a whole different kind of potential for audience, and that you have skills in that. But it seems like that there's another kind of art making that it's hard to tell, like, how are you going to make, how the money is made in it, but I
Yeah.
think that's still being figured out. Can you talk
Well,
about that?
yeah. So, well, in terms of, dance films, I've always had an interest, I edit together my stuff, or like, I edit together a 2-camera shoot, right? Like those basic stuff, that we all, I feel like we all do now.
Not
but,
all of us do that, but some of us do that.
I had to learn how to do it so I didn't have to hire anybody. A lot of the skills like I've acquired in my life is so because I can't hire somebody, right? Maybe that's that's wrong. Like looking back, I'm like, ugh, but like I can do everything now.
No,
right?
that's good. It's good to know how, sure.
So during COVID, I felt like I want to make dance films. I want to, give this a whirl. I took all the classes, as an undergrad, and all these things, and got a nice camera. And I had just to say, I had an interesting process. I decided, because we couldn't rehearse in person, I had 5 dancers. Some of them I actually auditioned like over Zoom. So strange. But I worked together on, I realized early on that I didn't want to set work on Zoom. It was like terrible, like phrase work, like, no, I'm not doing this in any way. This is too hard. I hate it. So didn't do that. So I came up with these we spent weeks learning improvisational structures, different physicalities. And then each of the 5 dancers made their own solo. That was pretty much improvised. And then with them, we chose locations and costumes and music. So it was I would say like a true collaboration. And I did the editing of it. And so last spring I went around and filmed them at all locations in the city. And I did my own little bubble exploration piece in my yard, and started to kind of make these, like, they were 3-4 minutes, right? And I really enjoyed the process. But a couple things. So what I learned is, like, it takes a lot of time, a lot more a different energy, same amount of time as making a piece, but a different energy. And I liked it. It was like choreographing. When you edit, you can make these choices. So it did feel like I was, choreographing in a way. And so I did enjoy that, but I also know like the back end of it. And like, I would have liked, like a better camera, like all these things, like, to leading up to the filming of it. There's a lot that goes into that, right? So I was feeling like that might be an avenue that I go in, and I have some collaborators who are videographers and visual artists, that sort of thing. And I have ideas for dance films, but when and how those are going to happen, I'm not quite sure. But on the flip side, just to say this too, is her name's slipping my mind. There's a choreographer who does lots of dance films. And what she told me is that since COVID, she actually makes more money off submitting her films to dance festivals, because she does very well, than she ever did with her company. So it's possible, is what I'm saying. But that's like her thing. Like that's become like her art making, So there you go. It's possible.
Well, yeah. Do you like her films?
Annabella Lenzu. Her name's Annabella Lenzu.
I don't know.
I do. They're very evocative, and they're very clear. Like she does, it's not just a pretty dance from 5 angles.
Yeah,
she has said that too. I don't make pretty dances. That's what she says. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it is another art form. It's not like just documentation of something that happens, in a room or a studio or a stage. And I'm fascinated with dance film myself. Thank you, Mitchell Rose, and the dance film classes that I took at OSU. Yeah. And his insistence that really this is another art form. And so what can we learn about it, and how does it work? And we are filmic, we all have this connection to screens from pretty much all of our lives. So we have an understanding of how to do that, or what works for us. So I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting other connection to another set of presenters who have a different wallet, let's just say. Yeah. And that might be the fact that it's profitable is interesting, I think. And I'm hoping there are young dance artists who are listening to this who are thinking like, yeah, that dance film thing, let's go and do that. But yeah,
there's a lot there.
Wow, is there something else that we didn't talk about? I'm still, I kind of, I mentioned your notebook, like how do you take notes? What does your notebook look like? But I am also fascinated with like your rehearsal process. And I have to say, I hope people get a chance to look at some of your work maybe on a Vimeo channel, but there's like, it's so dynamic and physical and spatial. Like all of these elements that are architectural, that are movement based, are visible. And I'm just wondering, like, what leads you in? What leads you into that, and how does that translate to the people that you're working with?
Yeah, I think it's changed over the years. The pieces I'm making now, I went into the studio one day. This actually works for me really well now. The older I get, the less I can do things over and over again, and the less I remember what I've just done, right? So I just put the camera on for like 4 hours and just like let it go. And then, I come up with scenarios, different like formulas, different things. I'm mental, what am I trying to say? Scores, that's the word. And I just, as many as I can possibly kind of come up with, not maybe ideas I have notes of, and just kind of do them and then see what they look like. Because often what like may feel like very interesting and cool, like I'll watch and be like, there's nothing visually there. So, so how to balance that out. And what it came back to in the last time I did this, and whenever it was like this very exacting strength. Everything I do is kind of strength-based and direct is kind of the heart of it, and very bound. That's like my naturalness, which is physically really challenging. And the pieces I like dancers like lift and get kind of aggressive. But my improvisation that I was kind of drawn to was very clear, not robotic, but kind of had that kind of a PC feel to it. And then I don't know, I just dug in with the dancer. So there's something about finding the physicality that I'm like super intrigued by. Like one of the pieces I had sent to you, I used this big long piece of white fabric called Walled. For some reason, arching and rounding was like the thing I was like super into. And like, I made like an original phrase at the time, and that's how many ways can I have the spine do that? Because of the look of it, I like the visualness of it. In the piece, I remember when we made it, like it was really hard for the dancer. It's really hard.
Well, looking at the piece, it is really hard, and it starts off with this arching, and the dancer is breathing, and you can see the fabric, and you can figure out like what actually happens in the body with breathing. But then, just it's assertive. It's completely assertive, bound, of course, but it's just like and that they're. Is it a community that's formed? I don't know. Do they know each other? Is there a relationship? Is there a story? Not necessarily, but there is like a physical draw that you seem to be fascinated with. And that's just great. I mean, and that's your place. That's your happy place.
Right. It's always, it comes back like this, like it just comes back to that. Like everything I do, right? Like maybe everything we do, it's just like comes back to like the body, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even like it's like here. Yeah.
I love that. That's a perfect way to finish this hour. That comes back to the body. It's beautiful. We are the movers. You are the mover.
Yeah, we contain multitudes, and we get to kind of share them.
Yeah.
Any last words from each of you?
It's just a pleasure to see both of you. And Bebe, like how many classes, like I don't know, the choreographic wisdom. I'm just like, just keep going, just keep telling.
Oh, wow. Well, thanks. But between the three of us, I mean, it's just like, this is what our field does. It's an oral tradition. We have to pass it on, and you'll pass it on in some way, and we rub against each other, and our ideas do that as well. So it's a win-win-win. Let's say.
Yeah, it's true. Thank you, Erin, very much for coming to visit us in Columbus. And Bebe, thank you for coming in and being a brilliant interviewer and then interviewee and conversation. I loved it.
Thank you,
and
Susan.
Thank you, Barnett Center for Integrated Arts and Enterprise, for hosting this. And thank you, attendees, for coming. And thank you to our tech support in the background. And then we get the awkward, leave the meeting. All right, take a deep breath, and then we'll tesseract back to our real environments. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.